The next thing you want to be doing on your mission trip is making sure that you are monitoring the quality of your interpreters. Now, if you don't speak the language, this is obviously going to be hard to do. But as your people are engaging, you want to just kind of be wandering around, listening to the conversations. Are the interpreters doing most of the talking, or are your people doing most of the talking? Or are they working together well in tandem? Does it seem like the people that they're talking to are actually understanding? Are they responding back? Make sure you are listening to that. And when you get back home every night from ministry, if you feel like the quality of your interpreters is not good, or you feel like you're having issues, grab your team, grab your interpreters, sit them down, and coach them through this process. It is you, the team leader. It is your responsibility to make sure that your team is having great conversations. Pull your partner aside, your global partner, your contact, your pastor, whomever, and talk through that. In another enrichment course, we have an entire video segment about how to speak through an interpreter. I encourage you to watch that video. Thoroughly be prepared to have your team ready to talk through an interpreter. And as the trip is going on, make sure that you are listening to the conversations, that you are intervening and coaching. What a tragedy it would be if your team is going out day after day after day, having conversations, but the interpreters are not doing a really good job, so your people are missing out on great conversations. Monitor the quality of the conversation, monitor the quality of the interpreters the best you can, and then coach them and intervene as necessary. If you don't do it, it's simply not going to happen. One of the things you want to be doing as you go toward the end of your trip is making sure that you have quality debriefing at the end of your trip. Now, I've already talked about having debriefing every single day to process with your team on what happened that day. But you want to make sure that you're preparing your team for re-entry back home. So you want to spend a chunk of time, whether it is in country or right when you get back, maybe it's at some hotel in the States before they go home or whatever. Just find a time where you can take a few hours and process the entire trip with your people. The longer the trip has been, the longer that should be. There are times where I've led mission trips that were 1 or 2 months long. So we end up spending an entire day thoroughly processing and debriefing. You want to make sure you prepare your people to go home, particularly if you have a younger demographic on your short-term mission trip. I do this with our high school students all the time. If I'm leading a trip with high school students or young adults, I train them to say certain things when they land. When you land at the airport back home and you see your mama waiting for you at the airport, the last thing she wants to hear from you is, "Mom, all I want to do is go back to the people I just came from." Your mama has missed you. She loves you. She wants to hear you say how much you missed her. So I will typically train my students what to say when they arrive back home. When you see your mom at the airport, you should run right to her, give her a big hug. You should give her a kiss on the cheek and say, "Mom, it was a great trip, and I missed you so much." That's the first thing every mama wants to hear from their kid. So you as the leader need to train them to say those sorts of things. If you have an older demographic, you want to say something obviously that's a little bit more appropriate for that demographic, but the same is true. Train them what to say when they see their loved ones when they get back home. Help them understand how their loved ones are feeling while they've been gone and help reunite them. Paint the picture of what that ought to look like. You as the team leader have the opportunity to train your people on how to have those initial conversations really well. The other thing I want to train my people for is how to have conversations about what happened on the trip. Most people back home, quite frankly, will ask you, but they don't really want you to spend a whole lot of time talking about your trip. When you go back home to your school or your church or your community, whenever you see someone, they're going to ask you, "How was your trip?" They don't want you to go into this big verbal vomiting for 30 minutes. But that's what a lot of people will do. So you have to train your people not to do that. So you have to train your people on what to say. Here's what I typically do when I'm training my people. I typically say to them, when someone asks you how your trip was, say this: "It was a great trip. Let me tell you one story." And what I do on the mission trip, before we ever go home, I have our people on the team, my team members, pick out one great story that they want to share. We call this the Kodak Moment. In fact, with my team, I typically have them go around the circle and share their Kodak moment. What's the one thing that you've done on this trip that you'll never forget? Or the one memory that will stick with you forever? And they share that. Now, if you're young enough to not know what Kodak is, they were a very well-known film and camera company for many, many years. And they had this slogan way back in the 80s called the Kodak Moment. These are the moments where you want to capture with your camera. These are the moments that are most important. I typically want my team to sit in a circle and share their Kodak moments. And then I train them on how to share that Kodak moment. In fact, I've even had teams practice, say, okay, go pair off and go practice sharing your Kodak moment. This is really important because I'm trying to train them on how to re-enter back into the United States. I want to help them understand what to say. When you get home and people ask you, how was your trip? You say to them, it was a great trip. Let me share one story with you. Let me share with you my Kodak moment. And then they go and spend a minute or two talking about this incredible moment they had. Now, if that person wants to hear more, they will probably ask. And I want to train my team members on how to have that type of conversation. You as a team leader, you know your team better than I do, obviously. You're going to know what they're experiencing. You're going to know what they're going into. You know what they're going back to. Paint the picture for them. Help them be prepared for the moments and conversations they're going to be faced with as soon as they get back. The other thing you want to make sure you prepare your team for is re-entry into their own culture. When you've been in another culture for an extended period of time, sometimes you have culture shock. I remember in 2010, I spent a month in the nation of India. In the nation of India, most people, men and women, have clothing that covers most of their body, and you don't typically see the shape of male or female bodies. I got accustomed to realizing what modesty actually is. And I remember the moment when I landed back at the Houston airport, and there was this massive billboard of a woman in the advertisement that was very, let's say, not well dressed or not appropriately dressed. I remember being shocked by it and looking away and not realizing how provocative our culture actually is. I was shocked by it because I'd been in India where the men and women are thoroughly dressed most of the time. You don't ever see that. You would never see a billboard of a woman that is inappropriately dressed in most parts of India. You want to prepare your team for those sorts of moments. What are the emotions you ought to feel? I remember when I was at the Houston airport in that moment, I was actually angry with my own country on how provocative we could be. I was embarrassed to be an American in that moment. And I'm not so sure that that's actually the emotion that God would want me to feel. I was embarrassed in that moment to be an American, but what I should feel is a burden to pray for my countrymen. Rather than being angry with my countrymen, instead, I should be motivated to pray, oh God, change my own country. As a team leader, you want to prepare your team members to be prepared for the reverse culture shock that they're about to experience as they re-enter their own country. It is your responsibility to have a quality debrief. Spend time with your team, process the whole trip, have them encourage one another on the things they saw in one another, have them talk about their Kodak moments, have them reminisce about all the things God did in them and through them on this mission trip. Have a great quality moment where you process and digest all that God has done on your team over the course of this short-term mission trip experience. And make sure you prepare them to re-enter. Prepare them for the moments they're going to face. Prepare them for the initial conversation at the airport with whoever's picking them up. Prepare them for the conversations they'll have at church when people ask them, how was your trip? Prepare them for the moment when their pastor asks them to come up on Sunday morning to give a testimony. It is your responsibility as the team leader to prepare your team members to re-enter and to take it home with them. This is an essential piece of the mission trip experience. And if you as a team leader botch this and don't do this well, you will not give your people the opportunity to maximize the experience and take it home with them. Make sure you spend a chunk of time debriefing and preparing them for re-entry. It will make a huge difference as they head home after the short-term mission trip experience. The next thing I want to encourage you to do on a trip is a simple, practical thing. Quite frankly, I probably should have maybe added this earlier in this video. But make sure you do this. I want you to carry a notebook and pen with you at all times on a short-term mission trip. It's really, really hard to carry an iPhone or some electronic device with you on the field. So I want to encourage you, keep a notebook and pen. On all of my mission trips, I usually have just a little notebook, one of those little cheap ones you can get for like 69 cents at Walgreens. Just a little one I can fit in my back pocket with a pen at all times, and I'm writing everything down. When I observe something, I write it down. When I see someone on my team doing something great, I write it down so I can remember to encourage them. If I see something that needs to be corrected, I write it down. If I remember an announcement that I got to give to my team, I write it down. If I remember something that I need to reteach them, I write it down. If I observe my team not doing something well on the field that I've already taught them, I want to pull them aside that night and reteach that thing and inspire them to do it well. Again, I want to write that down. If you think you're going to remember it all, you are sadly mistaken. Keep a notebook and pen with you at all times. Write everything down and make sure you don't forget to pass anything along to your team. This is so important. It's a simple little thing, but I promise it will pay huge dividends. I heard a quote from an old friend of mine. His name was J.W. Green. He once told me this. He said, "Kenny, a short pencil is better than a long memory." I've never forgotten those words. The last thing I want to encourage you with in this video is this, is to always seek to be sincere and transparent with your team, with your people, with anyone you're working with. Do not try to fake it. Don't try to pretend to be something you're not. If you don't know something, just say, "I don't know." If you're not sure about something, just say, "I'm not sure." Don't try to pretend like you have it all worked out if you don't actually have it all worked out. Be sincere. Be transparent. Don't try to hide your flaws. In fact, be proactive about sharing your flaws. Share so much of your flaws and be so transparent that your team is shocked with how honest you're being. One of my primary goals, whether it's in pastoring and preaching, or whether it's in short-term mission trip leading, or in any walk of life, I want people to be around me and think to themselves, that Kenny guy is really, really honest. It's almost awkward how honest he is. I feel like I know everything about him. He tells me everything. He doesn't hold anything back. I know that he's being honest with me. He doesn't know everything. He's got lots and lots of flaws, but he is so sincere and transparent about those flaws. If you as a leader have lots of flaws, talk about them. I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to be very abrasive with people. It's one of my biggest downfalls that the Lord is continually transforming me and sanctifying me in, seeking to be more gentle and less intense with people throughout the course of my life. So one of the things I want to talk about with my team is talk about my knowledge and self-awareness of my own flaws. I'll say things on a regular basis to my teams. I'll say, "Hey, I have a tendency to be very abrasive. I have a tendency to be very harsh. If I do that to you, please come and let me know." Or tell one of the other leaders and let them come and share with me. Please feel free to confront me on this area. I apologize ahead of time. And if I ever crossed a line of being too harsh or too difficult with someone, I usually try to stop and publicly apologize to that person. Ask yourself, what are my flaws? What are the things that I know my team's going to notice? And I want to proactively verbalize and articulate those things. You see, if you don't tell people about it, it's going to catch them off guard when they experience it. In my case, whenever someone maybe experiences me being a little too intense or a little too abrasive, it may catch them off guard. But if I've already proactively told them and they experience it, they'll say to me, "Oh, that's what Kenny was talking about." It may catch them a little bit off guard, but at least they would have been more prepared for it. They'll go, "Oh, that's what Kenny was talking about. I'm going to seek to proactively forgive him because he's already apologized in advance. And I know that he's going to seek to get better. He's going to be sincere and transparent." Never seek to hide your flaws. Talk about your flaws. Talk about your failures. Talk about the mistakes you've made. Be proactive in sharing and being open and honest with people. The English word sincere comes from an old Greek word that literally means without wax. Let me explain what that means. Several centuries ago, Greek people would make these elaborate statues. They would of people or places. And every now and then, the sculptor would, as he's sculpting, would make a little mistake. He'd have a little nick or a little flaw. And what they began to do was take wax and fill in the little parts where he had made a mistake. That way, you couldn't see it. The reality, though, is you could not put this statue outside in the sun because the sun would melt the wax. So then what began to happen is within Greek culture became this new wave of sculpting where you didn't hide your flaws. If you made a mistake or you nicked it, you left it as is. You would then send the statue to whoever it belonged to or whoever had asked you to make it for them, and you would send it with a letter that said, "Sincerely." Sincerely means without wax. That meant they were sending this statue saying, "This statue doesn't have any wax. I'm not trying to hide my flaws." And the good thing about that is, this statue can go anywhere. This statue could be inside, it can be outside. It can be in the cold, it can be in the heat. It can be in the shade, it can be in the sun. Because you've already proactively exposed the flaws of that statue. You've done it sincerely. You've done it without wax. As a leader, it is essential that you are living without wax, metaphorically speaking. The reality is, if you don't expose your own flaws, eventually you're going to find yourself in a scenario where your flaws are exposed. This is especially true if you're in an intense situation or you're living in close quarters with people, which is exactly what a short-term mission trip is. You're going to have a lot of intense moments, a lot of moments of pressure, and you're going to be living in close quarters. Live your life without wax. Expose your own flaws. Be proactive in being transparent and sincere with people. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a scenario where they are exposing you, but not on your terms, on terms that maybe will bring disgrace upon you or the gospel. It is essential that all of us as leaders in every walk of life, but especially on short-term mission trips, that we seek to live sincerely and transparently. This will drastically change the way you lead and will help you be more efficient and more effective as you lead your team on your short-term mission trip experience. In the next video, we want to take a few minutes out and give you recommended books that we think are important for every leader before you go on a mission trip with your team.